As far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a gangster. Good fellas, wise guys.
Three men wearing hoodies and brandishing high-powered automatic weapons, which included a MAC-10 submachine gun with a silencer and a semi-automatic .38 caliber pistol, would whack down Colombo crime family underboss and Orena faction loyalist Joey Scopo by spraying 24 rounds into his car outside his home in Ozone Park, Queens, after returning home from dinner with his future son-in-law, 27-year-old Angelo Barone, and his 25-year-old nephew, Dominic Lagazzo, while they were parked outside Scopo's building talking before exiting the car. This hit is said to be the final hit in the bloody and violent Orena-Persico War that terrorized the streets of New York City from 1991 to 1993. The Orena-Persico War was an internal civil war within the Colombo family between the two different factions. The faction of Vic Orena versus the faction of Carmine Persico, which started after Orena challenged the boss of the family, Carmine the Snake Persico, for power. The hit that would ultimately claim the life of Scopo was ordered by Theodore Persico Jr., aka Skinny Teddy, the nephew of Carmine the Snake Persico, on August 18, 1993, while he was in shackles at his grandmother's funeral at the Scarpacci Funeral Home in Brooklyn, while being transported and guarded by 3 New York State Jail corrections officers after being granted the okay to attend the service. Skinny Teddy was serving time in state prison on unrelated charges, and according to Mafia turncoat Anthony Russo, aka Big Anthony, Teddy whispered to Russo and 2 other members of the Colombos, quote, "You gotta kill Joey. I want my guys to take care of this. Get it done." Scopo was in charge of holding down the Colombo family for then acting boss Vic Orena, who was in jail at the time. Scopo, who grew up a close friend of Gene Gotti, was consulting with Gene's brother and Gambino Boss John Gotti on war strategy, while the Orena faction was shooting it out with Persico's side. Gotti was backing Orena and advising Scopo until he was ultimately convicted in 1992. From prison, Gotti would send word to Junior Gotti, his son, who was now Gambino acting boss, to sit down with the Colombos and call for a ceasefire. Although the men came to an agreement, Scopo would be shot down not too many months later, ending the 3 years of bloodshed known as the Orena-Persico War that would claim 12 Mafia members' lives, but indirectly is said to have caused 15 to 20 bodies altogether. Anthony Russo, who was driving the hit car, later went on to testify against his accomplices. He told the courts when the Colombo family split and everyone was forced to join factions, Russo chose to go with the Persico faction and was directly reporting to Skinny Teddy Persico, who were actively attempting to kill another Orena loyalist, William Wild Bill Catolo. But after botching a few attempts, Russo was advised by the crash car driver Eric Curcio that he had the drop on Scopo, so they decided to take him out instead. Wild Bill was also murdered just 6 years later in 1999 because of a different set of Colombo leaders, because they believed he was too powerful and becoming too rich, so he posed a threat to his bosses. Frank Guerra was another member of the Colombo crime family, was also driving a crash car during the Scopo hit, is also said to be responsible for orchestrating Scopo's murder. Guerra was a major drug dealer and part owner of Wanna Bagel, where 18-year-old Matteo Speranza was gunned down, and Guerra believed Scopo was involved in the hit, so he brought that information to the Persico faction, and that tip is what led to the hit on Scopo. Speranza was shot in the back of the head in December of 1991 and was just one of the many victims of the Orena-Persico War. The hitmen went into Wanna Bagel looking for somebody else, but when Speranza reached for something under the counter, the hit team thought he was going for a gun and fired. The hit car, which included driver Anthony Russo, aka Big Anthony, and passengers John Johnny Pappa and John Johnny Sparacino, pulled up to 110th Street and 109th Avenue in the Ozone Park section of Queens, and a stolen brown 4-door Buick and sprayed Scopo's white Nissan Altima with the MAC-10 with around 24 bullets, while him and his relatives were sitting in the car talking before going into their building. Russo pulled the hit car's back bumper up to the front driver's side door of Scopo's car, and John Sparacino swung the door open and let loose into the vehicle. Scopo is said to have hopped out of the car but instantly fell, and noticed John Pappa, who had hopped out of the hit car, hiding behind a tree. Pappa seen something in Scopo's hand, but he thought it was a gun. But when Scopo, who knew who Pappa was, threw his phone at him and called him a punk, Pappa then stepped out from behind the tree, walked up to Scopo, and shot him in the head. Scopo would die later that night, and as for Scopo's relatives who were in the car with him, his nephew was hit in the shoulder, but both men survived. Following the hit, Russo fled the scene and drove to a prearranged destination just a few blocks away, where they would get rid of the stolen hit car, and Russo would tell Sparacino to ditch the MAC-10 by tossing it into the car's back seat. They then tossed their gloves and ski masks into a bush nearby, and the crew was picked up by one of the other crash car drivers, Frank Guerra. The hit team then left the area. Scopo had originally began his mob career as a member of Gotti's Bergen crew, being Gene Gotti's best friend and a very close friend of the Gotti family. And along with Gotti's influence to install Vic Orena as boss of the Colombos, he's also said to have got Scopo placed as underboss of the family. The reason Scopo didn't stick with the Bergen crew was because Scopo's father, Ralph Scopo, was a made man with the Colombos and requested to keep his son close. Ralph Scopo Sr., aka Little Ralphie, was president of the Concrete and Cement Workers Union from 1977 to 1985, as well as a made member of the Colombo crime family. During his time as union president, he used his position to extort cement contractors in New York, and in return would receive labor peace and large construction contracts. Any contracts between $2 and $15 million were reserved for members of what the commission called the Concrete Club. The commission made Ralph Scopo a member, and in exchange, members would kick up 2% to the commission, which would ultimately lead to Scopo's conviction in the famous commission trials, where he was charged with racketeering and carrying out orders for the 5 families and sentenced to 100 years in prison with no parole. Ralph Scopo died of natural causes at USP Lewisburg on March 9, 1993. Joey Scopo would be assigned to take over as capo of his father's crew after Ralph Scopo was convicted, and would also take over his concrete union position along with his brother Ralph Jr. Joey Scopo also had a social club a couple of blocks from Gotti's Bergen Hunt and Fish Club on either 102nd or 103rd Street in Ozone Park called Cafe on N, but would spend his Saturdays hanging out with the Gambino guys at the Bergen. Scopo, at 6'1", was a handsome, tough guy and was well liked by the guys in the neighborhood. Scopo was also said to be a good earner, a gentleman, and a good father to his son Joe Jr. Leading up to the Scopo hit, when Gotti Jr. was acting boss and his father sent for him to get the message out that he wanted a ceasefire, Gotti Jr., along with his captain, Mikey Scars Di Leonardo, met Genovese acting boss Laborio Barney Bellamo for a sit-down at Anthony Amoroso's house on 85th Street and 162nd Avenue in Howard Beach, where they agreed to end the war, but obviously that didn't happen. It's also rumored Gotti Jr. and Mikey Scars were supposed to be meeting Scopo the night he was killed. As for the hit team who took Scopo out, Frank Guerra was acquitted of the Scopo murder, but still wound up locked up on a 14-year sentence in 2013 for other crimes. John Pappa was convicted in 2011 on racketeering, drug dealing charges, and 4 murders, which included the murder of Joey Scopo, as well as 2 of his 4 accomplices who were involved in taking Scopo out, because he felt they were taking credit for his work and blocking him from being brought into Cosa Nostra. Pappa shot Eric Curcio on October 4th, 1994, in Curcio's auto body shop. Pappa also lured Sparacino to the home of Calvin Henniger, who killed Sparacino before Pappa arrived, making Pappa so mad that he mutilated the body and then set it on fire on August 15, 1994, and left his remains burning in a stolen car. Pappa and Sparacino were close friends growing up and would eat dinner cooked by Sparacino's mother at their home, and was actually nabbed by feds on Staten Island in 1997 while attending the wedding rehearsal party of Sparacino's brother. When Pappa seen the armed agents approaching, he ran to the nearby St. Anne's Church and pulled out a 9mm but tossed it into a pew before being arrested. Due to his testimony, Anthony Russo, aka Big Anthony, was sentenced to 53 months time served for driving the getaway car and ordered to pay $110,000 criminal forfeiture. Skinny Teddy Persico was indicted for his role in the murder, with the feds claiming he was in one of the 3 cars at the scene, as well as Teddy's cousin and Carmine Snake's son, Michael Persico, who authorities say ordered the murder and supplied the weapons. Skinny Teddy pleaded guilty in 2012 to conspiracy and extortion charges and was sentenced to 12 years for ordering Scopo's murder from his grandmother's funeral. Michael Persico pleaded guilty after the Scopo murder conspiracy was dropped to just a loan sharking charge, and he was sentenced to 5 years in prison in July of 2017. According to another source online, Joey Scopo was actually only shot twice in the abdomen and once in the chest by Sparacino, and made no mention of Pappa shooting Scopo in the head. The article also stated that Scopo's nephew, Dominic Lagazzo, was hit twice in his left arm, once in the shoulder and once in the elbow. Police recovered 23 shell casings at the scene, and according to Scopo's neighbor who called police and stayed by Scopo's side after the shooting, Scopo was out of it until his son came running outside. When Scopo seen his son, he snapped out of it. Joey Scopo would die 2 hours later at Jamaica Hospital in Queens, New York.